Hey guys, thanks for joining us today. A lot said out in the media about the gold market and once gold's out of the ground, but not a lot's known about gold when it's in the ground. So I've decided to bring along an expert in the field, Andrew Tunks from Meteoric Resources. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Philip. It's great to be here, mate.
Fantastic. Now I've got a lot of questions and there's a lot of things people want to know about gold. Now, can you just let people know your background a little bit before we get started?
Sure. So I'm a geo. I've been a geo since 1987. I graduated here from Monash in Melbourne. Went straight to Kambalda and started working in gold exploration. A little bit later I went and did a PhD at the University of Tasmania, and I did it on the Tanami gold deposit in Central Australia, so I spent a lot of time out in the bush. And then after that I've essentially worked for gold companies pretty much all my life, exploring in Africa, South America, Australia, all around the world, little deposits, big deposits, you know, right from the exploration stage through to gold mines, development, the whole bit really. Yeah, so I'd like to think I've learned a little bit along the way.
Well, you definitely have, because I know from our conversations, I felt like I was a bit of a gold expert. And after I spoke to you, I realised, oh geez, I don't really know much at all, which is great to have you along, because I know there's a lot of people that are in the same boat where they know a little bit about gold, but they don't. I mean, there's a lot to know, and as we'll find out. So,
well, I think that's where we're compatible, Philip, because I don't know much about the other end once it comes out of the ground, and the gold markets and things are not really my speciality at all. So I'm all about while it's still in the ground and how to find it and how to get it out.
Yeah, fantastic. So with that, to start with, how does gold form?
Yeah, so gold deposits, you know, form in rocks, and the gold is always younger than the rocks, or not always, but in 99% of the deposits that we're sort of looking for to exploit commercially, the gold is younger than the rocks. So you've got to think about that. The rocks are there from millions of years before the gold comes in most cases, right? Now there are some exceptions to that, but the majority of cases that we look at, the mesothermal, the epithermal gold deposits, don't worry about those names, the gold comes in later, okay? And the way that works is that the gold effectively comes into the rocks in hot water. So you might not think that you can dissolve gold in hot water like you can, say, dissolve salt in hot water, but you can. But you've got to get the chemistry right, and you've got to be under a lot of heat and a lot of pressure. But yes, you can dissolve gold in water. And then the other really key element of that is that when the gold is in the water, you know, rocks are impermeable. That means that fluid doesn't flow through rock, right? And so how do we get the water into the rock? That's another great question, right? And really what we have to do is fracture the rocks. We have to break them, and we can be 20 kilometres down, right? Gold deposits form deep, way down in the crust, up to, you know, close to the surface. So we've got to fracture the rock. And what is a rock fracture? Well, that's an earthquake, okay? So gold deposits and earthquakes are really linked, okay? And that's, we break the rock, we allow the hot water to come in, and that can form the gold deposit, or other metal deposits as well, right? Not just gold, but many other metal deposits are formed in a similar way. And so that's why now when we're exploring for gold deposits, what we're really doing is exploring ancient earthquake faults. Ancient faults. So you'll see that we'll drill in a particular direction, and you know we'll target these big faults. Or in fact, what we're often doing is targeting the small faults around the big faults. That's often where we find gold deposits. If you look in Kalgoorlie, Kambalda, you know, there are major long big faults like the Kundana fault, the Canalpi fault. The gold deposits typically don't sit right in the big faults themselves. They often sit in the little faults. And what we need to do is understand the three-dimensional architecture of the faults themselves, and that's what we explore for now.
So Andrew, what you're saying is there's an earthquake, and what the gold comes from the Earth's crust that's forced out by water?
Yeah, so you're right. You know, the crust is the outer layer of the Earth, right? And in the continents, it can be up to about 50 kilometres thick. In the oceans, a lot thinner, maybe only 5 kilometres. There's a lot of argument about where the gold starts from, right? Does it start deeper down below the crust in the mantle, right? Where does it come from? Does it start lower down in the crust at the base of the metamorphic pile, or where does it come from? Really, in exploration, that's an academic argument. I don't care. I don't care where the gold comes from. What we're looking for is it's coming from down. It's coming from a hot place to a cooler place. Fluids, you know, convection, same as cold, hot air circulates around a room. So the water's coming up, it has to go through these channelways, through these active faults. One of the really interesting things about the earthquakes and also about aftershocks is when you make a big fault and it slips, like San Francisco or one of, we don't have big faults in Australia that are active now. We're in a very stable zone, but Chile and South America, etc. Because we precipitate quartz, gold is in quartz veins often, that quartz precipitates instantly geologically, like in a heartbeat. It might be 100 years, but in a geological scale, that's instant. Nothing. Yeah. So the fault precipitates, fluid stops. So then the fault has to go again and again and again, and that's the aftershock sequence that we see in earthquakes. The earthquakes don't just move once, right? The big fault doesn't move once, it moves hundreds and hundreds of times, getting smaller and smaller each time. And that allows pulses of fluid to come through. And so we're taking the gold and the water from somewhere deeper, the source, we're transporting it in the fluid into the trap. And the trap can be different rock types, drop in temperature, boiling of the fluid. There's a whole bunch of different things that can make the gold come out of the liquid and precipitate, become gold.
Yeah, right. So you're saying that these gold deposits that are found around the world are basically formed over what, thousands of years or longer?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes when we look at the very minute textures, and I'm going to get carried away here because this is really exciting for me, but when we look at the minute textures, we can see hundreds of thousands of events, hundreds of thousands of tiny events, and we can see that. So yes, gold deposits take a long time, maybe even hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah, right.
But that's a heartbeat in geology, right?
So it's like a connection to like our history, I guess, in a sense. Like people like looking for dinosaur fossils, but at the same time, there's these metals that have been, waiting to be discovered, I suppose, for millions of years.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. So geology, in my opinion, is the study of the history of the planet, right? But on a different time scale, on the millions of years scale. And that was one of the things that attracted to me in the first place, was that immensity of the time, So many of the gold deposits that we look at, all the deposits of Kalgoorlie and Kambalda, 2.6, 2.7 billion years ago, amazing amount of time, half the history of the Earth. The Earth was completely different then as we know it now. Some of the ones that we're working on at the moment in Brazil, about 1.8 billion years, 1,800 million. The gold deposits of Victoria, 400 or 500 million years. And then the new gold deposits like in Chile and New Zealand, maybe only a couple of million years. So gold has occurred right throughout the history of the Earth.
Andrew, a lot of the time when you see like a gold deposit, it seems to be found with other metals, particularly copper and things like silver. Why is that? Like, why is it found with other metals?
So that can depend on a whole range of factors. It depends on what was in the source, right? So was there silver and copper in the source? And so if we look at modern deposits that are forming now in Chile and places like that, the porphyry coppers, okay, the gold deposits there are associated to a much larger copper deposit. And so they can have high copper or silver or moly, a whole range, tellurium, tellurides, a whole bunch of other metals. The Archean deposits, for example, of Australia, tend to be very gold rich and not much of the other stuff. So that depends on what's available in the source rock. So does it come from the mantle or where else? What the chemistry of the fluid was that transported it, what were the other things soluble, and what the trap is. How do we trap those metals at the end? Is it a chemical trap? Because the chemical trap that might precipitate the gold may not precipitate the copper, because the copper might travel further out in the system, or the copper might have already deposited. So that's a really complex question. But yeah, it's very rare to get just one metal because the chemistry of the metals is a bit similar. So yeah, we get pairs of metals. Copper and gold often go together. For example, gold and silver often go together. So silver, lead, zinc deposits, right?
Yep.
They all form. The silver, the lead, and the zinc was all transported by the same fluid and trapped by the same mechanism. So yeah, so we do get lots of multi-element deposits, multi-metal deposits.
Okay, so when we're looking for deposits, like is it a thing to look for where these fault lines are, or how do you know where they are, or
Absolutely.
What's the process?
Yeah, no, so what we do, well, one of the things, and that begs your last question, is that sometimes we don't look for the gold itself. One of the things that often comes with gold is arsenic, right? So you get arsenopyrite in the gold deposits. Now there's a lot more arsenic than gold. There's not a lot of gold, people don't realise, but when we talk about 1 gram per tonne, that's 1 part per million. Now at those levels, the arsenic might be 1%. So it's much easier to find something that's 1% than something that's 1 part per million. So if there's arsenic associated with our gold deposit, for example, we might look for the arsenic first, And once we found an arsenic anomaly, then we'll hone in and try and find the gold part of it, right? Or the copper or whatever, right? So we do use metal exploration techniques. In terms of the faults, what we look at is we often make a magnetic image, and people will have seen those beautiful, what they're called false colour images, but they're like a rainbow coloured image, right? The MAG, TMI, total magnetic intensity. And from that, we make up a map of the geological structures. So we look at where the faults are. So we see a unit terminate, well, a fault must have cut that unit off, and we interpret the faults. And we know, gee, where the faults had water in them, they're a good place to start. What is the geochemistry in the faults? One of the things about gold exploration is, in many ways, it hasn't changed in the last hundreds of years, because gold exploration historically has been guys going out with pans and panning up the streams and finding gold, right? And that's what we do now. When you're panning, you can pan down to about 1 gram per tonne, 1 part per million. If there's less gold than 1 part per million, it's really hard to find. Now with our modern geochemical methods, we can go down to 1 part per billion, so we can find smaller anomalies and stuff. But the old timers found most of it. And so one of the great ways to explore now is to go where the old timers were digging for gold and drill underneath it. And that still works now. And that works all over the world. And it's one of the main methods of discovery. Go to where the old timers found metal, drill underneath.
Yeah, and you're familiar with that, am I correct in saying that you've had experience in that? Can you
Absolutely. So, my career started with exactly that in the goldfields. Everywhere in the goldfields in the 1980s, in Australia, we made discoveries by going to the old workings, because the old timers, when gold was $30 an ounce, right, fixed price, they could only afford to mine super high grade. So 1 ounce material, 30 grams. And so they would selectively mine these narrow veins, and what they would leave behind is now an economic deposit. So they'd take out the heart of it, the super high grades, but the halos around them that come from the boiling water that the gold brought the gold in, that can distribute gold over a much wider interval. And so that's where a lot of discoveries are made. Where we're working at the moment in Brazil, for example, in the 1980s and the 1990s, there was 30,000 guys on site mining the surface dirt. Amazing,
That's a lot.
Must have been crazy, right? And so they're all gone now, and they've mined down to about 25 metres where the rock gets hard, the water gets too much, and the metallurgy, they can't get the gold out anymore. So we come in and we drill underneath their workings, and that's where we're having success right now.
Okay, it seems almost like it's not cheating, but it seems like an easier way to find it rather than trying to find a greenfields project.
Yeah, well, the prospectors are very efficient, and really most of the deposits that are exposed at the surface have been found already. So we've got to go back and re-look at old things again and again. The deposits that are found that are new were covered by something. So in Australia, salt lakes, a lot of big discoveries found under salt lakes. The prospectors couldn't see through the salt lake, so they never found those ones. Up in the Andes, under the ice, okay, in Greenland, under the ice. So there's things that might mask them. Younger rocks, rocks that are younger than the gold deposits, covering them up, and you have to learn to explore through those. Now that can be super expensive. It's too much for a company like mine, but so we're following the old timers.
Fair enough. Stick to what works.
Absolutely.
But what is there any new technologies that are coming through? Obviously, you're talking about some methods that to help you try to find it. But is there any new technologies that are coming about to make it easier to find gold?
Absolutely. So, largely they're what are called geophysical techniques, and they can be really useful. But again, not so much for finding the gold itself, but for finding the stuff that's with the gold. Okay. So, for example, if you're looking at a massive sulfide ore body, that's an ore body with more than 80% sulfide in it, you'll use a technique called EM, right? Electromagnetics, and that's because you can set up currents in those massive ore bodies and look for where the currents go. At low sulfide percentages, you use things like IP, induced polarization. It's where you pump current into the ground and see where it goes, and you can find low concentrations of sulfide. Because before, when I said the gold comes in the hot water, what really happens is there's other things in the hot water that help you dissolve the gold. And one of those things is sulfur. So when you go to a hot springs and you can smell the sulfur, at some level, way down, that might be carrying gold. Yeah, the gold's deposited down there. What you get now is the sulfur, right? And so that sulfur was carrying gold. That sulfur reacts with the iron in the wall rocks and makes pyrite, and the gold sits with the pyrite. So sometimes it's easier to find the pyrite than it is the gold. Gold doesn't have a signature, it's not radioactive, there's not enough gold to see a density contrast. So we use other techniques to look for the things around the gold.
Seems like a very smart method. It's like, yeah, rather than trying to find the thing you're looking for, is find what's more abundant and comes with it.
Yeah, it does. But with gold, because gold is in such low concentrations, it's still really hit and miss. And so what we might find is a pyrite body with no gold.
Okay.
Right? And so we get a lot of what we call false positives. There's something there giving us an anomaly, but none of the stuff that we're looking for. So there might be massive sulfides. It might be something else. It might be graphite. Graphite gives off a great electrical signal. Yep. Could be water in the groundwater with salt in it. So that we do get false positives, but you have to wear those while you're looking for the gold.
Okay. And I've been interested because there's obviously all these new technologies, like you're saying, that are out to test these things. But how did they know back in the day? Like I was in Bolivia at this, trying to think of the name of it. It's the biggest silver mine in the world.
Yeah.
Like, how the hell did they even know there was silver in there? Or how did the old timers know?
Well, prospecting up the creeks, right? Panning. That was all they had back then.
But I'm talking like thousands of years ago, like Egyptian times. Now, how did they
exactly
know?
the same.
Really? Okay.
Because the deposit was formed deep underground. It gets uplifted to the surface. It erodes. Okay, so the rivers, rain, ice, snow, ice, wash it down, and it goes into the rivers. And so they find alluvial gold, right, in the rivers, and they track back up the river, and they go into so let's say there's gold in the river that you're in, and then you go off into another arm of the river, and there's no gold. Well, you don't go up there. You stay in the river until you find an arm that has the gold, and you just track it back. Yeah. We do exactly the same now in Australia a lot with what are called stream sediment surveys, and we look at because Australia's so dry, the streams are empty and no water, but we still sample the streams extensively, and we plot those up, and we look where, if we find gold, we backtrack to where it come from. And that's what the prospectors were doing with their pans, and their skill was unbelievable.
It must be, yes, it's like a treasure hunt almost.
I still think of that. When I look at a geology map and I'm exploring for gold, I still, in my childish mind, see the X, right? And I still think this is where we got to drill. And, but that's now based on fault architecture, fault intersections, and a whole bunch of other, modern stuff, I suppose.
Yeah, I was actually having a conversation with a director, private company. They've got some assets out in Victoria, and we were talking about, because he was talking similar about finding fault lines. I was like, well, isn't there some sort of technology that maps it all? And then about 2-3 days later, there was an announcement. I don't know if you're aware of it. It was, I think there's people like Bill Gates and those sort of guys invested in this fund that's funding it. It's basically this technology that's going to scan the world for these.
So there are those around. The difficulty with those is they don't tell you whether so for there to be a gold deposit, that fault had to be active at the time there was gold available. So we can put a fault right through the middle of Melbourne now. It doesn't mean it's going to have gold in it, right? Has to be a unique set of circumstances. So not every fault has gold or ever had gold. So yes, you can identify the faults by density contrast, by groundwater flow, by all these things, but it still doesn't find the gold for you. Okay?
Damn, I thought it'd work.
God damn it. If it was that easy, mate, everyone would be doing it.
Sometimes it's like that, I suppose. And so if that narrows it down, where's the next step once you've actually found these deposits or you found the sulfide or something like that? How do you go from there? What's the next step?
So exactly what we're doing now, you've got to drill it out. We call it the truth meter. You've got to put holes in the ground. You've got to drill through the ore body. You do your best. If this is the fault, you're trying to drill at right angles to the prospective structure. But again, it's never that simple. There's often multiple sets of structures that ore bodies don't have typically a planar geometry. They have a very complex geometry. And so you're trying to start simple and grow your understanding. And a great example is we've just started a drilling program at a place called Novo Astro, a giant soil anomaly, produced 500,000 ounces of gold, never been drilled, right? And so we have this unique opportunity to go in and drill a new project. And we were sitting there worrying about where we should drill. And I said to the guys, let's not outsmart ourselves here. Let's just go and drill under where the miners have been mining, right? Let's not overthink this. We haven't had time to do all the techniques. We haven't done the geophysics yet, but you can still, the old way is a good way. And we can see open pits where they've been mining, and we're just going to go and drill on those structures. Now, we won't get it all right, but, we certainly there's enough system there that I believe that there's a substantial gold deposit there. So let's see.
Okay.
And this is the exciting thing for me. Sorry, when you're drilling, like, it makes the hairs on my arm stand up. Like, it's the best time. You're waiting to see the core come out. My geos will be on the rig every day, you know, looking, peering over the core, looking for sulfide first. So if there's sulfide, there might be gold, and then looking for free gold itself. I mean, you might remember a couple of weeks ago, our first hole hit amazing visible gold. And then we had that, you know, 20 metres at 90 gram intercept. Well, that's as good as it gets.
So with when the drill results come out, can you tell straight away, obviously if it's visible, but like, is there times where you don't know, or do you always know when it comes out that we've hit the, you know, we hit a winner here sort of?
Absolutely, you can't tell typically. Gold, it's very, very rare to see visible gold. Even at some of the world's best gold mines. Damang, you know, we very seldom saw gold, you know, so it depends a bit on the chemistry and the host rocks, but it's quite rare. I mean, I don't know how many metres, hundreds of thousands of metres I've drilled in my life. I've probably seen visible gold in the core 20 or 30 times, right? But I've drilled in a lot of gold deposits that have got good gold, but you just don't see the gold. It's microscopic. It's 10 microns, 20 microns. It's in the sulfides, etc. So often you don't see it. But because it came in hot water, and that hot water alters the rock, that creates other minerals. So so pyrite is the obvious one, sulfide, right? So look, where we're drilling at the moment, if we don't see sulfide, we probably don't sample it because it's not worth it. If we see sulfide, we're probably going to sample it. If we see sulfide and cerussite, which is a mica, and phengite, which is another muscovite, okay? If we start to see a whole bunch of those minerals, then we get excited. Even if we can't see the gold, you know, and that's, every deposit has its own characteristic set of alteration. And so you've got to get your eye in. And there's no doubt, like in our example at the moment, Jurina will be different than Novo Astro. So what works at Jurina, it's 30 kilometres away. That's enough for the fluids to be different, the timing to be different. We think Novo's deeper, so a bit hotter. So the chemistry will be different. So the indications that we look for at Jurina aren't necessarily the indications that we'll look for at Novo Astro.
Okay, so it's not like a one size fits all. We can put this template across everywhere. It's different each time.
No, absolutely it's not, because different host rocks. So we're all in granite, but a lot of the world's gold deposits occur in mafic rocks like basalts and dolerites. So they would have a very different alteration. So in science terms, we'd say that they're host rock buffered. The change in the minerals comes from the chemistry of the host rock, not the chemistry of the fluid as much. So it's an interaction. So you can imagine if a rock's very rich in iron and magnesium and gets altered, that will result in a very different thing than a rock that's very rich in aluminium and potassium. Just you get different minerals.
Yep.
So no, there is no one answer.
Okay. And I've always been interested because, I mean, they're drilling deep into the ground, a lot of these you know, test drill holes. How much of it is luck, and how many times do you think maybe that they've maybe missed, like maybe there is something there, but you only get a few goes at it, right? Like you've got to raise money, so then, like, is it, you've got to pretty much hit it, or is there many times where there probably is something there, but they just haven't found it? And
it can go both ways. Like, I mean, I've been at prospects. One I remember in Ghana called, I think it was Amawanda maybe, and we drilled into this zone, and the rocks were bright green, and then they went like white with alteration, and there was pyrite, and there was veining, and there was structure. Everything that I was like, I've hit the mother lode, right? Was first of all was in RC, which brings up chips, and I was so confident I got the diamond rig straight in, and we put a hole in underneath, and I was like, man, this is no gold. Everything except the gold, right? And then other times, you know, I've drilled into things that don't look that great, and yet you get spectacular gold. And that, you know, so if it wasn't for assaying and the very accurate assaying we can do now, it'd be really, really tough.
Okay, that's fascinating, because I didn't know whether you could just look at things and know, because I feel like sometimes, I mean, I've travelled to places where there's mines and things like that, and I was like, geez, you could just walk past this place and you would have realised that there's, you know, I don't know, millions of dollars worth of minerals in the ground. Like,
well, the greatest example of that is a fantastic district in America, some of the world's biggest gold mines, the Carlin district. And the gold at the Carlin district, they call it no-see-um, because you never see it. It's so fine, it's a couple of microns, right? And so the old timers mined there, they mined these tiny little high-grade veins, and all the while, They were sitting on like 50 million ounce gold deposits and didn't know it because they couldn't sample for it. And so, you know, Getchell and Betsy Post and all these amazing deposits were previously mined. And these guys were living on top of what are now the world's biggest gold mines, Gold Strike, and didn't know it.
Jesus.
So yes, we're always learning.
Yeah.
Always learning about different styles and different indications, and yeah, so it's a great science.
Yeah, because they say as well that like the gold's like hitting peak production, they're not really finding new discoveries. Is that the case? Like, is there going to be new discoveries like maybe deeper in the ground or using new technologies or new extraction methods, or what's the future of gold mining, do you say?
I think that there are massive discoveries. I think that the mining industry in general, the earth is untouched. What we've done is explore the top 10 metres that we can see. What we're not great at yet is exploring deeper in the third dimension. So we've explored the top 10 metres all around the world. Most of the earth now has been walked on and picked over by prospectors and panners and stuff like that. But down, the world's deepest mine is 4 kilometres, right? It's about 3,600 kilometres to the centre of the earth.
And whereabouts is that?
In South Africa.
Okay.
All right, the deepest mines are on the Witwatersrand, the world's biggest gold deposits. And so we're not even 1/10 of 1% down to the middle, right? So, and the crust is 50 kilometres thick, and we're down 4 kilometres, right? So there's massive discoveries to be made when technology allows us to do the things that you want it, to model it, and to get down to them. You know, as you go down, the temperature increases, right? Roughly 20 degrees per kilometre in cold rocks and more in hot rocks like New Zealand. So, you know, if you're 4 kilometres down, the rocks are 50, 60, 70 degrees. It's hot enough to cook an egg.
Jesus.
You can hardly live down there. The conditions, you know, so man, we've got a lot of stuff to learn yet and a long way to go, but I don't believe that there's any danger of running out of any of our metals anytime soon.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely get you back in future once it goes to the asteroid. They're talking about mining asteroids and things like that. I think we're a few years off that.
And for gold, that's a really interesting thing, right? So the meteorites that hit the Earth, we have all different sorts. And one of those sorts is called a stony meteorite or a chondrite. Okay, that's the name for it. We find them all the time and we measure them. And they have about, so if you look at the global crustal abundance of gold, it's about 1 or 2 parts per billion. But these meteorites have around one part per million, or a little bit less. So around 100 to 1,000 times more gold in them. And we think that they are what the Earth is, right? So in other words, the crust of the Earth is really depleted in gold, the crust that we can see. So where the hell is that gold? No one knows. But it's got to be down there somewhere, if we believe that the Earth and the stony meteorites are the same. And by and large, that's one of the consensus.
Is that why you called it Meteoric Resources? One day you could go mine in this space.
Absolutely, you know. It's been meteoric for a long time, but I do think it's a great name.
All right, so let's bring it back to Earth a little bit. Now, a lot's said about grade is king when it comes to gold. What does that actually mean?
Well, I think not just gold, any mining, right? So grade is king. Grade refers to the percentage of what you want in the rock. Okay, so let's just assume a 1 tonne of rock. And a low-grade gold deposit, say mined in an open pit, might be 1 gram of gold. And a high-grade underground deposit might be 15 grams of gold. So, and that can be iron ore, it can be anything, but it's really just referring to the percentage of the material that you're trying to extract versus the waste. So ore versus waste, right? And at any time, you know, you want more of what you want, because that means, first of all, you have to move less tonnes to get it, right? So if my gold deposit is high grade and I'm mining narrow zones, I'm mining right to the edge of the ore deposit, might only be 3 or 4 metres wide, and I'm just trying to take that 3 or 4 metres of stuff, and that's what I take to the plant. So I've got less mining cost and I've got less transport cost to get to, just even if it's only a couple of 100 metres, I've still got to put it in a truck and take it there, right? So then from there, I've got to crush it. And crushing is the first phase, right? And that's expensive. I've got to put it in a giant mill and roll it around, often a SAG mill, which is where the rocks crush against each other, and take it out the back end. Now, if my gold's super high grade, like at Jurina in Brazil, for example, and there's visible free gold in there, I can put in a step there where I do what's called a gravity extraction. So I just put it in a giant spiral and spin it around, and the gold, because the gold's heavier than the rock is about 2 tonnes per cubic metre, gold's 19 tonnes per cubic metre. Not that you would ever see a cubic metre of gold, but it's much, much heavier. So we can extract it from gravity. And that means I don't have to mill that portion of the rock.
So it just separates itself.
Yeah.
Nice and
okay,
easy.
just like at the beach, you know, sometimes you see the black sand at the beach separating from the white sand. The black sand is full of ilmenite and rutile, so they're titanium. They're heavier than the quartz sand. So it's just we just use water, and it's the way the old timers separate in a sluice. So effectively, grade is king because it means I've got lower mining costs. The mining costs might be higher in effect, but because I'm getting more gold out per tonne, my profitability is better. And that's really what grade is king about. It allows me to in gold, it allows me maybe for a gravity step, and then I'm getting all that gold out without even giving it to the cyanide leach tanks and really having to crush it fine, because after crushing it, the next step is milling it, where we turn it to powder. We put it in a ball mill, giant shot puts, and it grinds up, and that takes an enormous amount of power. So again, if I can get the gold out before that step and only put a portion of my ore through, that's another saving. So grade is king in terms of profitability, and that's really what it means.
Okay, that makes sense. And something you were saying earlier before we started filming, which really I think needs mentioning, is like you're saying when they're mining things like iron ore and whatnot, there's these big, trucks and on trains and stuff. But when it comes to gold, it's not so much. How does that play into
partially
mining?
That's a value thing and how many tonnes you need. So if you look at a big mine, like one of the world's biggest copper mines, Escondida, right? So that mines 1 million tonnes a day, right? For me, as a gold miner, that's unbelievable.
Well, what's that as a visual? Like, because when we throw these numbers around, I find even myself, I can't visualise.
Oh, it's a small building. It's a building. Like it's a skyscraper. It's an enormous amount of earth that they're moving every day. I mean, a really big truck is 360 tonnes. If you're moving 1 million a day, that's a lot of trucks. It's an enormous amount. So in a gold mine, a reasonable sized gold mine might be 1 million tonnes or 2 million tonnes a year, right? So we mine in a year what they mine in a day or two. So very different,
big difference, yeah.
Right? And so in a small high grade mine, like we're looking at it in Jarena now, we might only mine at 15 grams, a tonne, we might only mine 300,000 tonnes a year, right? So a really small amount. And so what does that mean? It means you don't need those giant trucks, you don't need giant earth moving equipment. And then let's just take an example of a gold mine that, say, produces 100,000 ounces per annum, right? So if you produce 100,000 ounces, that's about 3 tonne of gold. Now that sounds like a giant amount, but 3 tonne of gold is a really small amount. Let's break it down further. That's around 60 kilos a week, right? If you do the math roughly. 60 kilos is 3 gold bars. So every week you're putting them on the table and you're taking them out in a helicopter, you're taking out in the secretary's under the seat of her car, whatever you're doing. But you don't need a superhighway, you don't need a train, and so you can set up a gold mine, a really profitable high-grade gold mine in a remote place, and you don't need a railway line. It's small equipment, small tonnes, not too many people, and can be but still super profitable, and that's a really big difference between the gold mines and the base metal mines. That they can be cheaper to build, and they don't really require substantial infrastructure. If you're going to build a big copper mine, you're going to build a massive road in there, you're going to build an airstrip, you're going to build a giant power plant. If you're not on the power, you're going to have how many thousands of litres of diesel must you use a day, to move 1 million tonnes, how many explosives and all that. So we're looking at something that's of a much, much smaller scale, and that's why gold works really well in remote locations. Out in the middle of nowhere, you often find these tiny little gold mines, they make a fortune.
Yeah,
Great business.
That makes sense when you put it that way, yeah. Well, it's actually fascinating when you actually hold gold in your hand and realise how heavy it is, like even just having 1 ounce.
Yeah.
It's like tiny, but you can really feel it.
Oh, absolutely. So it's 19 times heavier than water, right? And about 8 or 9 times heavier than normal rock. And gravity, and so that means we can use gravity to get it out. Because in a water stream, the gold falls straight to the bottom and sits on the bottom, and everything else rolls across the top of it. And that's why we use Whiffley tables and all these low-tech things to really extract gold. Very cheap, often you don't need chemicals when the gold's high grade.
Oh, thanks, Andrew. I feel like I've learned a lot in the gold space that I didn't know about before, and hopefully a lot of the viewers have picked up some new things. But I'm sure they're going to be going, why don't you ask this? Why don't you ask that? So I'll ask for people watching, if you've got questions for Andrew, pop them down below. We're going to catch up when he gets back, heading off to Brazil soon.
Yeah, I'm in Brazil for around the next month. Yeah.
Yeah, so pop your questions down below, and next time he pops on, we'll get them answered, and yeah, hopefully we can all learn in the process, and yeah, learn how this thing works from someone that actually does it for a living.
Thanks very much, Phillips. Great to see you, mate.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers, buddy.